Welcome to Drinking and Driving. Here at Drinking and Driving, we'd like to remind you that drinking is fun and driving is fun. Just don't do them together. Have fun, but be safe. Hey guys, once again, this is Joe Yarbrough. I'm here today at Schlafly Brewing in St. Louis, Missouri. I've actually got a large group here today. With me, I've got Stephen Hale. I've got Kimmy Schlafly of the Schlafly family. It's not a coincidence. Jared Williamson and Wil Rogers with one L. How y'all doing today?
Great, yeah. Happy Wednesday.
I can't even believe it's Wednesday. So I'm actually up here for a wedding. Yeah, I want to get an interview, get some good beer. So just to start off with, I am kind of a Schlafly fanboy. I used to live up here for about 5 years, literally just a 3-minute walk away. Takes a little bit longer to walk back after you've enjoyed a few, but
I knew you looked familiar.
I thought I was on the do not fly list here, but I guess my punishment is worn off. So what we're gonna do today, we're just gonna talk about Schlafly. I know you guys have been around since 1991, actively brewing, and I know there was even some stuff before that. Which the fact that you guys even exist is pretty amazing, considering you're in St. Louis, where there's a very large company. We can name them if we'd like, but they don't need any more advertisement. But yeah, so kind of how did that start out where, hey, let's go ahead and build in the home of the King of Beers? Like how did that come to be?
I would say the relationship began between co-founders Tom Schlafly and Dan Kopman after Tom Schlafly took some continuing education courses at Oxford University, and he said he learned more about beer than law. And when he came back, he talked to a fellow attorney he worked with named Charles Kopman, who said, "You need to talk to my son, Dan." And Dan had gone after college to England and worked for Young's and Scottish and Newcastle and started an export business from the UK, bringing beers into the United States in the 80s. So he had a lot of hands-on experience in the industry on that end, and the two met and teamed up, incorporated. We had a little milestone anniversary this year. The incorporation was 30 years ago this past July.
Oh my goodness.
And so that was pretty significant. So the two got together and decided to open a small brewery. They initially wanted a shipping brewery, which ultimately has become the model for many breweries to open now. Open a shipping brewery, have a significant size tasting room. It walks and talks like a brew pub, but people don't call them brew pubs anymore. It's got either food trucks outside or a small kitchen, and that's what they really wanted to do. But they met with a local restaurant person who persuaded them the menu should be a little bigger. So they opened a full-on brew pub in 1991. They acquired this building, the historic Swift Printing Company building. In the summer of 91, sandblasted one part of it. It's a pair of two buildings if you haven't been here before. Famous in the movie, I got to say it, famous in the movie Escape from New York, because Snake Plissken walks past the building on his way to a pivotal scene kind of early in the movie. So it's the whole movie was filmed in St. Louis, and there's more on that later maybe. But they got the brewery up and running by December of 91, and there were 312 breweries in the country then. As most of your listeners probably know, there are about 7,500 roughly now. It was 3.5 years before a brewery opened near us and stayed open, besides AB, obviously, which has been around since the 1800s. And we were kind of lonely for a little while. It was just us. And now there are roughly 60 or 70 within an hour plus drive.
Yeah, in the guild.
Yep, in the St. Louis Brewers Guild, STL Beer. So the landscape has changed considerably since then. So that's the early quick history. So we are looking at our 28th anniversary this coming December.
Wow, that's amazing. And I can say, I haven't lived here in a few years, but you talk about just, how you've got so many within an hour, but even within walking distance of this exact location. Mm-hmm. And they've definitely popped up. I can think of 4 or 5 just within walking distance of here. It depends on what your footwear is. Then that number could kind of fluctuate a little bit.
Right. Also, Joe, remember we're in America, so walking distance here is not the same as walking distance in Europe or much of the rest of the world. I would say bicycle distance
Scooter distance.
Scooter. Now it's come on, people.
Lime scooter.
Lime scooter. Come on, people, get some exercise and walk your bike. But there has been talk of a pub crawl on bicycle along a long stretch of road called Manchester, and if you zip over to Four Hands and Square One and Charleville, they're all within about a half a mile of each other, and then just continue west, and you'll probably hit another almost dozen breweries, 6 to 12 breweries. So it's pretty significant. Don't forget to go to the Landing, because Morgan Street was one of the second ones to open in 1995 down on historic Laclede's Landing. Trailhead opened in the spring of 95, Morgan Street in the fall. Both are still in operation now. So
yeah, I think just driving into town, I looked down at the Landing. I was like, hey, there's Morgan Street. So like I said, I'm fairly familiar with the area. So guys have been around since '91. Some of you have been here longer than others. So I guess Steven's been talking for a while. Give him a break. Who wants to kind of give their little bit of their beer bio, if we will?
Sure. I've been in the industry for 16 years, and my first interaction with Schlafly was, what year did you guys come into Indiana? Was it like 06?
that sounds about right.
Yeah. So I used to work for a small family-owned brewery that started as a specialty beer bar and pizzeria kind of place. They had draft from all over the world, and then a lot of the craft stuff. They were, early on one of the first Sierra accounts in Indiana, Guinness, Spaten. So when Schlafly moved into Indiana, they hosted an event there, and I remember there was these two kind of dorky guys wearing tweed jackets and kilts, and they had an English-style pale ale, and forget what all we had. I remember coffee stout, I feel like. But yeah, I met these guys, and they were really nice, had really quality, very true to style kind of beers. And at that point, the mid-2000s, it was like the IBU arms race for a lot of craft brewers, So it was kind of refreshing in a weird traditional way to have these like very middle of the road, middle of the style kind of beers, but just really well done. Later on that year, I think I was in town. There used to be, still a festival called Microfest. And they would bring in breweries from out of state. And I came and poured beer for the company I used to work for. And actually came to the tap room, had dinner. I was really impressed with the facility and the feel of it, the pub, the wood, the brick, just the history. Kind of kept coming back to St. Louis once a year for Microfest, and then got to know some of the other brewers at some of the festivals, some of the salespeople, because they were in Indiana. Once they came into Indiana, they had a pretty good presence there, and still do. Later on, we used to have a festival called the Repeal of Prohibition Fest, and they would bring in breweries from out of state that you couldn't get here in St. Louis. It happened in early April. 2008 was Indiana breweries, so we were invited to some connections between staff, and we came in town, and I met the woman I'm going to marry next spring at that festival. Came in town to do a beer festival and met my partner. From that point on, it was kind of, she moved to Indiana for a little while, but I had a conversation with Dan Kottman about, if you guys ever have any openings, I think St. Louis is probably a better spot for us to be than Southern Indiana, Louisville area. And he was spot on. He was like, well, we'll probably need a brewer in like 18 months. And 18 months later, I started.
There you go.
Jared, sorry, I got to say, I remember that night.
Yeah.
After the repeal of Prohibition.
I do too.
It was, I remember most of the night, I should say.
Yeah, the festival was at Bottle Works, our location in Maplewood. We came back here for dinner at the end of the festival, and yeah, that's where we had our first meal together with other brewers, and Stephen and Sarah and
Roger.
Yeah, Roger.
I honestly thought you were going to say you came into town for one of these things and just never left. You're like, so I showed up with my own brewery. They left, I stayed.
Yeah, I came in town to pour beer at a beer festival, and my life changed.
That's crazy how that works.
Yeah, so I've been with the company now 8+ years. Started over at Bottle Works, production brewer. I like to say Bottle Works is where we make the money juice, and downtown here at the tap room we make the fun juice, and the money juice funds the fun and pays the bills.
Sure, why not?
Yeah. So yeah, I've been in charge of the tap room for about 2.5 years now. worked my way up and stuck around and have gotten more important as the years have gone by. So, yeah.
Making great beers.
Yep.
Well, I can't argue with the great beer one there. So now we'll go to you, Will. So how'd you get into beer?
So I started working at the Bottle Works my senior year in college, and essentially I was more on the pub side. Bus tables, worked in the kitchen, kind of whatever they needed me to do. And then I started asking about, hey, you guys need help with these festivals? Do you need help in sales? And 8 years later, heading up the marketing department and working with the brewers to help figure out what beers we want to put out into the market and what beers they want to brew and what we think people like and what we think people don't like yet but might like. So get to work closely with Jared and our head of brewing operations, Emily Parker. But yeah, it's been a fun ride, kind of starting out cleaning up empty pints off of a table, and 8 years ago, Jared started like 2 months before I did at the Bottle Works, and then I started working in the pubs and worn a lot of different hats.
If I may interject and just say it was fun to watch that. I didn't know Will necessarily that well early on in the restaurant side, but as soon as you started as a sales rep too, and remember that beautiful green van you had to drive over to?
No AC in that van.
Yeah, we won't talk about that van, but it's been fascinating to watch the progression of different people here over the years. You get a foot in the door, whether it's on the canning or the kegging or bottling line, and just working your way up through. And watching Will get up to head of marketing has been just another example of how co-founder Dan Kottman really liked to reward people for that hire from within. We just posted a job opening for a lab person, and if this podcast airs later, sorry, that post has probably been filled by now, but maybe it hasn't. It's posting within first, and we always try to promote from within, people who have paid their dues, as it were, and it's really gratifying to see that we hired the right person a long time ago, and Dan Kottman was really good at seeing that potential in people.
Yeah.
Well, and that's something I really like. I've worked for different companies, did different things, so it's really not great when you get this new boss and you're like, who's this guy? He doesn't know any of us, and he's got his own way, or she's got her own way of doing things, and it's just not we've been a tight knit group all this time, and then you get an outsider, and so it's actually really cool. It's like, oh yeah, I know this person. Obviously, they deserve to go up the ladder,
right?
Maybe not the ladder that's sitting right
here,
but
the roof.
So I think that's really cool, and obviously proves that this is not just a great beer, but a great company. Just because you've got, I was in college, and now flash forward, here I am still. I mean, that's kind of a cool loyalty. And of course, I mean, you seem to know a lot about everybody here, Steven. So it sounds like you've been around the company for a minute or two.
Well, I moved out here sight unseen from Maine in October of 91. All my worldly belongings in the back of my pickup truck, and the city of St. Louis looked a lot more like the years when Escape from New York was filmed here, which I wasn't going to say this earlier, but maybe now's the time. Tom Schlafly has been quoted many times saying that the city was chosen because it was a perfect venue to film a movie about post-apocalyptic New York City, and it doesn't look like that at all now, but it did in the late 70s on through the 80s, and they bought the building in 91. I also like to say that this, for those of you listening who have been to the tap room, you know this. If you haven't seen it, picture an old 3-story brick building, 2 of them actually, a pair of them, that I like to say was built in the early 1900s as a brewery, and we let the printing companies use it for 70 years before we actually moved in and put the brewery here. It's iconically gorgeous. Yes, I'm biased, but come in and tell me otherwise. There's no TV and no music in the original dining room side. We do have both of those in the newer side, but it gives you a great old continental European English pub flair feel, which I really like. And I'm going to try not to say so much because I have a lot to say. But
well, I mean, just to riff on that, I mean, I feel like this, and I'm pretty sure I've talked to both of the guys about this. It's Tom Schlafly and Dan Kottman, I think, started this brewery so they could have a pub that reminded them of being in Europe and wanted to brew the styles of beers that were classic to European styles, so that, I mean, yes, they could get an American adjunct lager here readily available at that point, but you know, all the other styles, the English pale ale, the oatmeal stout, the Kolsch, you know, all these classic, you know, European styles that you just couldn't get really in the early 90s without imports. And even then the imports, you know, it wasn't like they were super fresh.
Yeah. They weren't the best. They were just what was available.
Right. So it was like they almost opened this place kind of for themselves and for other like-minded people.
Yeah, it's the closest thing, one of the closest things you'll get to an English pub in especially the St. Louis area.
There are a couple other local brew pubs that have a really good feel to them, and they are standalone fabulous, but the tap room's pretty iconic. It's also on the National Register of Historic Places.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the photography done from that pivotal scene in that Escape from New York movie in the evening with the illuminated sign on the corner is just gorgeous. It's like somebody created the most iconically perfect brewery building. Back to when Tom and Dan chose to open this place, Tom has also said many times, I just wanted a place to stop by on my way home from work and not pay for a beer.
Okay, he still does it to this day.
Why don't you write checks totaling more than 7 digits to fund this, fund the opening of this brewery? And yeah, you're a good man. You tip the bartenders, but then you're gonna have to pay for your pint. That made me laugh.
Yeah. I mean, and you know, it's funny because you know, I've talked to other people who founded breweries and things like that, and it seems like it's just like something cool to. I'd love to own a. I mean, I'd love to own a brewery. I mean, who wouldn't? I mean, that seems kind of like the ultimate like fantasy. Like, yep, this that's mine. And so in some cases, like literally has my name on it. So speaking of names on the building, I did save you for last. Obviously, not the least, but Kimmy, let's hear some Kimmy history.
Well, I did a lot to earn the last name, obviously. Just born this way. I'm still very new to the company, and so I'm still learning a lot. I just started in July, but I'm really excited about it. If you haven't heard, this place, with or without a Schlafly, is definitely a family place. There are people who've been here forever, like everyone else in this room. But I'm the community engagement liaison, so what that means is basically I'm here and probably gonna work my way up. But it's all, for me, this is all just about, my focus is on St. Louis. We are in 14 states currently. I think it's really cool that we're the St. Louis brewery. We're still the little guy, even though we've been around and there are more little guys now. I think it's really important and cool that we really have a true stake in St. Louis.
Yeah, honestly, I mean that's what I find so remarkable about this. Like I said, just you know, you've got a giant company, and then you guys. I mean, that just shows there's plenty of pie for everybody because you guys have a really big piece of the local pie. Now
people love to drink in St. Louis. I think that's what that means.
Well, you know. So speaking of 14 states. I actually I got a pleasant surprise. I currently live in Florida, and last October, roughly this time?
Yeah, probably September or October.
Oh my gosh, I almost had a tear in my eye when I saw this display. I was like, and I'm like, there's nobody I know there. I'm like, guys, look everybody, there's Schlafly, and they're like, yeah, we live. I was like, no, you don't understand the pumpkin beer. Like,
right.
I'm sure everyone's like, you mean
Schlafly?
What? I'm sorry. What is that name?
Schlafly's.
Schlafly, don't bother me.
Yeah.
Well, as I've learned, I already knew some of the history of the brewery, but I've learned more working here. And one of my first questions is like, why in the world did you pick Schlafly instead of Kopman? Because who can say our name? Nobody. Yeah. But it makes it more fun, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot you can do with it.
Yeah.
They weren't going to name it Hale because my not cousin Mike Hale in Seattle, Pacific Northwest, already used that name, so I was out too. But it is much easier to say Schlafly Hefeweizen after you've had several pints.
Yeah. It kind of rolls, well, I guess it pours off of the tongue at that point.
Well, whenever I do samplings, obviously no one knows that it's my last name, and everyone's like, oh, Schlafly, and I'm always like, yeah. You know, it's the first L that gets everyone.
It's whatever you want to call it
at
this point.
If you want to drink it, I'm cool with that.
Just pronounce every letter.
Yep. I mean, honestly, the only thing I would say the very first time, I said schla and I said fly, just because it has the word fly at the very end. So that's what I said. And then someone,
It is
let
a
me
fly last name.
Kimmy's actually got a great way to tell people how to pronounce it.
Oh, it's obnoxious, actually.
Do it.
School minus the O's plus a fly.
Whoa.
So you
It's for
really
middle
have
school.
to think about that.
And that is middle school humor, if you've ever heard it.
Yeah, that's too much
I think-
for me to process right now.
The best part is I'm going to be editing this, so I'll get to hear that about 11 times. And I'm like, I finally get
It'll
now.
hit you on the
Yes,
11th
I
time,
got
yeah.
it. Yes.
Yeah, we
So-
used to have coasters that tried to help with the pronunciation, and it's like laugh is in the middle of the word, and a lot of people don't see that, but
Yeah.
it's laugh and should laugh.
Yeah, so laugh, Lee.
Well,
that's how we help.
I can tell you some fun facts about the last name.
Uh-oh.
There we
It's-
go.
We're still in the history segment. Let's do it.
Well, I'm a linguist by trade. That was my major. And I was very curious about my last name. It means little sleeper in Swiss German. And it is as common as Smith in the region that my family originated from, in this small portion of Switzerland.
Steinhoff.
Yeah, my family comes from Steinhoff, which is famous. It's a teeny tiny little village, but we were farmers there, and it's called Steinhoff because there was an asteroid that landed in this small town. Wow. And Stein means rock, and so it was this tiny little village with an asteroid. It's very random.
Nice.
That explains
I did not know
everything.
That is why we're so weird. Some weird extraterrestrial stuff going on here.
Jared, do you think it's time and Will, do you think it's time we brewed a Stein beer?
Please don't make me put a blazing hot rock into the kettle.
We'll make Kimmy do it. She brought it up.
So we've got some great history. We can already tell just in the few minutes we've been talking. We've got some great chemistry here. Like you said, even though you happen to be a Schlafly, everybody just seems to be family here. So I would say that's pretty just apparent just being here. So the next thing I was going to ask about here, just what's the most popular beer that you guys have?
Pale ale.
Pale
Pale
ale.
ale?
Definitely pale ale.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's an English pale ale, so that's I would say probably been a struggle the whole time describing to people that hey, it's an English pale ale, not an American pale ale, so it's more balanced. But yeah, that's the one that we came out of the gates with really, and it's been leading ever since.
I mean, would you say overall is this like for every other beer combined you're selling a pale ale, or is it like how popular are we saying
It used to be in the 40s percentage of
Oh, wow.
sales, but I
Mhm.
think it's probably more in the 30s now.
It's probably still in the 40% range. If you took pale ale and pumpkin ale, that's going to be probably 65%
Wow.
of what we sell. And the crazy thing is pumpkin ale sells for 3 months.
Yeah.
And I actually did talk about this on another episode about pumpkin ale. So pumpkins themselves aren't a very flavorful gourd. I mean, if you go down to the grocery store, grab a pumpkin, pay for it because you don't want to eat it, and then just take a bite out of it, you're going to be like, it was water with a little bit of very little flavor on its own. Like I said, I'm a fanboy, so maybe I'm a little biased, but you've got one of the best pumpkin beers I've ever tasted in my life. I mean, it's pumpkin pie in a glass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
really about that spice character.
and that's what I love about it. I just like pumpkin pie in a glass. So I can understand. Like I said, I almost wept when I saw it in Florida. I was like, no, am I done? Is this heaven?
Right, yeah.
Like I mean, even though that liquor store is almost heaven just on its own,
Yeah,
but
those places are great.
But yeah, it was pretty awesome seeing it down there. But so that's 65% just in those two beers.
Yeah, probably in that range. And it's a lot of it. A lot of our business happens in St. Louis, right? And so it's pale ale is kind of the original St. Louis craft beer. So there's been a lot of people. It's cool to see people now who started drinking it when they were 25 or 30, and now their kids are old enough to drink, and now they're drinking pale ale. And so there's just some longevity to the brand overall, and it helps that it's a really good beer. I mean, it's just so well balanced. It pairs well with food. I mean, it's just a really good go-to beer.
In much of our trade area, this is Stephen again here. In much of our trade, well, I didn't say that at the beginning. Hi, thanks for listening, everybody. In much of our trade area, if you walk into a pub and ask for a Schlafly, what you mean and what the bartenders and staff know, especially in St. Louis, is you mean a pale ale. In DC and maybe New York, maybe some other areas, Kolsch might be a more popular style in a couple of pockets. But for the most part, around here, it's definitely the pale ale style.
Oh, yeah, I almost forgot, now that you mentioned DC, quite a few years ago, I actually took a trip to DC, and there's a local pizza place here. I guess they've got a branch over there. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I wonder if they're affiliated with the one in St. Louis. I walk in, and I see Schlafly. I'm like, oh my God, this can't be real.
Yeah.
Like
I went to school in DC, and that was like my beacon. I would go there with my friends and be like, we're getting some Schlafly, we're getting some pie from home. Like it was always so much fun.
I walked through, I was like, that looks suspiciously like the one in St. Louis. I was like, there's no way they just, and I was like, sure enough, they're totally one and the same. So one thing I was going to ask about, so, we talk about what the biggest sellers are. How much beer comes out of this location per year?
Well, at the peak before Bottle Works opened, we did 7,000.
Almost just shy of 7,000 barrels of draft.
So this was a production facility up until the point that Bottle Works was opened. And then it's kind of evolved and transformed into more of a specialty R&D kind of brewery. So now we're more around 1,000 barrels a year. And most of that stays at the pubs, draft and retail and whatnot. And then, like I was saying earlier, the money juice out of Bottle Works, that's all the distribution stuff, all the 12 packs, the cans, 16-ounce cans, 12-ounce cans, the draft that you see out in the market. And we don't make anything at both locations. Like it's only one or the other, Gotcha. So there was a time where we did make both at, we'd make pale ale and Hale at both and Kolsch and stuff. And then kind of as things have ebbed and flowed in the market and the brewing operations have evolved, now it's all the big beers as sellers are made over there, and all the specialty beers are made over here, and then we ship beer back and forth to the pubs. And
so do you don't brew pale ale at this location then?
No, we probably haven't brewed pale ale down here since, I don't remember if
we were still brewing it when I started. They were still making draft here.
Oh yeah, we continued to do that for a while, and this is making me think of a situation of don't look behind the curtain. The tap room is the showpiece old building. Well, it's an older building than Bottle Works, but Bottle Works stands on its own 100% with an amazing garden outside, a very comfortable retail area when you walk in. We do tours of the brewery itself. It is on its own a really fabulous brewery. They did a good job of planning the layout for it and everything. It has its own menu. There are some shared food items at the two locations, but for the most part, they are fairly separate restaurant food items. And it's just that it's far more efficient to brew on one level. If someone convinces you to buy a brewery and you have to put the equipment on 3 levels, I don't know how much of a hurry I'd be in to open that. That's gravity brewing, sort of old fashioned. So we have an elevator. When some of the brewers, having spent a lot of time at Bottle Works, come back over here to work, they forget how often they have to use the stairs to get to the cellars.
You get your steps.
It is probably not the most inefficient brewery in the world, but it's definitely not the most efficient. So they each have their attributes.
Yep. So we brew 4 days a week over at Bottle Works. Currently we're averaging 6 or 7 brews a day. Downtown we brew like once a week, and then they're packaging 4 or 5 days a week out at Bottle Works. We package a couple days a month, kind of thing, because not everything we make here goes into like a bottle. We make a lot of draft only stuff, keg stuff. We do the casks still down here, some of the traditional stuff like that. But yeah, it's just we've really kind of geared this brewery now towards barrel aging, sours, hop experiments, hop trials.
Like you said, the fun stuff.
Yeah,
this is the playground.
Yeah,
and then, that's the work over there.
Yeah, so nice. And then some of the classic old school styles like Dortmunder, stuff that we all love, and we still want to drink it. During the year at some point. So, we'll make that for draft. We got ESB is coming back pretty soon. When I started, I was the youngest brewer 8 years ago in the company. And now other than Steven, I'm
Thanks. I know, I've been here for a while.
You're one of the
now I'm
the
the old
elder
guy.
statesmen.
Yeah, now I'm the old guy that's like helping to mentor and foster our brewing team. And it's interesting to see what they're excited about from a style standpoint. And also, too, I mean, their love of like a lot of the classics. Like when we were sitting down, like Will was talking about upcoming portfolio plans, and it was like some of the draft only stuff. And it was like, all right, what do you guys want to do? And it was like, well, we got to do all these classics. We got to make sure we make those, you know. And then we have a small 20-gallon system we call Pilot Works. When we really want to like trial stuff that we've never done before, it usually ends up on that first, and then we're going to brew a few times and tweak on that. But yeah, there's over the years, Schlafly has made so many different styles. I think one year we did close to 80 within a year, which is just bonkers.
Crazy making.
Yeah. We're now more around like 40 different styles a year.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just so much classic stuff. You know, we brewed a triple last week. We haven't brewed triple in 7 years.
Yeah.
8 years. Yeah, it's fun to always cycle back through things, but then also be innovating and coming up with new stuff at the same time. So
yeah, this is a great place to figure out what new things we can. You know, we did a hazy IPA a few months ago, and you know, we're like, oh, let's try it. Let's see what can happen. And they made a killer batch of beer, and it was one of the fastest beers that sold at the pubs ever.
Out,
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
15 barrels sold out at the pubs in 12 days.
So he gets on the computer and shoots me that, and I'm like, well, looks like we should probably put this out into the market.
Guess what? We know.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned an IPA, the beer. I don't want to say forecasting, but kind of the history of beer in the last few years. I remember like IPA was kind of a fringe thing, and now it's there's this kind of IPA, double IPA, New England IPA, and you're just like IPA. Like, and it's been around, obviously, you know, it's been around as a style for a really long time, but as far as popular, it's been, you know, it's had a few year ride. Do you see, like I said, any sort of a forecast of any other style that seems to be kind of doing that?
Fingers crossed, Pilsners, lagers, clean Pilsners and lagers. Like, just from a person who works at a brewery and hangs out and drinks a lot of beer, like it's refreshing to just have a really nice, clean, low ABV Pilsner, you know? Yeah.
Man, sometimes I just want a beer. And that's not a knock on the IPAs and the extremes and barrels and sours and everything else. There are very few beers of which I will not have a pint. And that said, they may not be a pint. Yes, a second pint, maybe, but probably not. If it's an evening of having several beers, where's my pale ale, Kolsch, oatmeal stout, Dortmunder, classic styles we have been doing for 28 years. Pretty much most of those styles we have stuck with the classics. Again, this is not a knock on breweries that are hanging their hats on multiple IPAs or different hazy, New England, juicy, brute, whatever, different IPAs. Those are great. If your customers are buying them, keep doing it. I don't predict a really long future for them, as in forever and expanding. Things go in cycles. Sours probably have not hit their peak for the mass populace.
Would you
really.
say they're probably the up and comer right now, the sour?
Again, I think I go back to what Will said. I don't think the sours will ever have the broad market appeal, even though many of them, if they're not too sour, if they don't make your mouth pucker too much, a whole lot of them could be. Let me put it another way. Many years ago, it was easier for me to get new people into the craft industry who were weaned on, call it mass market, big beers, which is what most of the beer in this world is sold as. It was easier for me to get them to drink certain Belgian beers than it was an IPA or a barley wine or an imperial stout.
Sure, yeah.
It was juicy and tasty and pretty easy to drink. So I think sours still have a lot of legs, but I think the classics won't go away and have strength.
Yeah, I went to a beer fest, one or two beer fests in my day.
You went to one beer fest?
I know, right?
Dang, Joe, you got to get out more often.
But I went to one. I mean, not even that long ago. I don't know. My time. I mean, my son's 5 now, so I say not that long ago, but he didn't even exist then. So maybe it was that long ago. But I don't think I saw one sour at that point. And now I went to a beer fest last weekend, and almost everybody there had something in the sour. I was just like, this. So and this was just me. I was like, man, is this? I still don't even think it's going to be as big as an IPA is. I still think it's going to be a little bit more of a fringe group. Yeah. But I still think I was just like coming from nowhere in a short period of time. I'm surprised how fast everybody's got one on tap. Like that surprised me. And like I said, I don't even think. And I'm not a huge IPA guy. I know what an IPA tastes like. You know, I can appreciate it. But on the same note, I'm not a huge IPA guy. I'm not a huge sour guy. But my wife, she loves the sours. But once again, she has a sour. She doesn't have multiple sours. She doesn't have plural sours. Right, she has a singular for the most part. And it's just, you get that little feeling right here in the back of the jaw, and that's a good feeling. You sip on it, and then you kind of move to something that you could drink, a little bit more.
You better carry your packet of Tums made in downtown St. Louis. If it's a night of sours, those Tums will help.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Hey, Joe, you around this weekend? There's a beer festival this Saturday. What time's the wedding?
Where's the beer festival?
We'll talk after this.
Yeah, let's work on that. Hold on now.
And then after you edit all this, Joe will tell you how great that festival was. And man, that wedding, I wish I'd gone.
Maybe I'll just convince the wedding party to all come to the beer fest. That'd be cool. So, and I would agree, getting back to, getting a nice, just clean drinking, just nothing, super this way, super that way, which works really well on a podcast when you do directions,
Right.
But nothing super extreme in any direction. So I do like that. That's possibly a, something you guys are seeing as something happening. So this is just kind of a fun question. We'll leave that up. Obviously, we're going to have to leave you guys out of it. But if you're just like, man, craft beer, what excites you as far as, throw another craft, group out there. Either, you can say a specific, like, ooh, I like this exact beer from this guy, right. Or just a brewery that you guys are excited about. It can be local St. Louis, just whatever you guys think. Just what do you guys like?
Are we all going to say the same thing?
I could take a guess, maybe. But
I think I can guess at a couple of what these guys might say, so I'll let them go first.
I don't know that I would specifically point to any one brewery. The thing that gets me interested when I walk into breweries these days, first, diversity in brewing portfolio. There, like you're saying, there are plenty of breweries out there that you walk in and they have 7 different IPAs and a sour and an imperial stout, and that there's some diversity in there. And, there's a lot of different hop varieties, coming out these days that have all kinds of interesting characteristics. And the newer hops get me excited too. So when I see hop varieties I haven't tried before, which is kind of hard because we've been on the front foot of that for a long time, and we've been working with hop farmers, so we try a lot of hops before a lot of other breweries even hear about them. But just seeing a good balanced program, and then actually tasting the beers, a good quality program, because I still refer to this industry, there's a lot of the wild west happening in this industry still, both from a quality standpoint and then just a safety and process standpoint. Just because you like beer and have money and can buy stuff doesn't mean you know what you're doing. And even if just because you're homebrewing doesn't mean you know what this industry really, what it really takes to make quality, consistent beer. It's not so much on the hype side for me. It's more on, properly running and producing. Running a brewery and producing clean,
I think you hit
beer.
a really, and you just used the word again, consistency.
Yep.
That right there. If you're like, wow, that was really good, and then you make it again, it's like, well, the last one was better. It's like, right. That is something I found. I've gone to places and I've been like, wow, oh my gosh, these guys have a killer insert beer type here, right. And I'm like, I'm excited. I just happen to be going to that area again. I go back and I'm like, what is this?
Yeah.
I almost feel like just, what is this? Throw it against the wall kind of stuff. I'm like, what happened? What did you guys do? Whatever, they're inconsistent. They, messed up and they still released an inferior product, things like that. So that's something, you're right about being consistent is a big thing.
There's something to be said for our neighbors down on Pestalozzi, who I think at this facility make, when I moved here, it was 14 million. I've heard it was 20 million barrels of beer now. Their consistency worldwide, that's pretty admirable. the beer style is not for everybody. I go to a lot of master brewers meetings here during the year, and I'll have much of what they create, both on their research pilot brewery and their main brewery. But consistency, that's a great buzzword.
I mean, there are literally suppliers for like lab equipment in this industry, and they recommend calibrating your equipment with their beer because it is so consistent.
Oh,
Right.
wow. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know,
It's a unit of measurement.
Right.
Literally.
Yeah.
you know, and I think too, back to the whole like Pilsner and clean and just like a beer thing. I know so many brewers in this industry that, you know, they're brewing lots of these hazies and they're kind of burnt out drinking them, but that's what's selling.
Right.
Yeah.
And what do they want to drink? They just want to have a good, clean, balanced lager, you know.
I would say that's probably where I'm at. I can enjoy, you know, some of whatever, but like just nice clean lager. I mean, and you don't have to get fancy. You know, if kind of you had me at hello. You know?
Right. Yeah.
You know, just,
So I don't know if Will's ready to
Go ahead.
share, but I would say answering the question slightly differently, not like your deserted island beer, but two pinnacle, more or less beer styles, but calling out the breweries by example would be Young's Best Bitter, Young's Pale Ale, Cask at the brewery in London, which I got lucky enough to try, I think it was 9 years ago, and I couldn't believe how crystal clear that beer was. Cask, not filtered, finings of course, but just a beautiful beer example, probably 54, 55 degrees Fahrenheit, served in the 20-ounce British Nonic pint, just perfect. That and having a Czech lager in the homeland, if you can, to me, those two pinnacle beer styles answer all my beer needs. Sure, I'd miss an oatmeal stout or a barley wine, or I'd miss other beer styles on occasion, but I hold those two beer styles as, for me, pinnacle examples of the beer to drink when I might not know what I want to drink, but those are definitely the hallmarks. So going into a new brewery, and there are a couple of breweries around here that brew pretty close examples of those, I will look around for that beer style. As I get older in the industry, I'm a former rugby player. I still like to drink beer, but the ABV, the older I get, that number goes down more and more. And if I can find session, which in my opinion is not over 4.99%, in the fours, high threes, if I can find something in that category, I will definitely do it. So,
I see something.
On cue, we're having some beer delivered, talking about nice, clean, hallmark examples of a beer. But in the meantime, Will, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go more straight up beers that I really just enjoy, and probably part of the reason why I enjoy them so much is that I can't get them all the time. So there's a cool little hole in the wall brewery out in Denver called True Brewing, and they do this Keller Pils called Cold. And I can't go to that state and not go into that little brew pub and get that beer. It's incredible. I love that beer.
Cold or gold?
Cold. 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 It's a Keller Pils. It's incredible. And then another beer that I can barely ever get. Sometimes some fine folks will bring us some, but there's a brewery out in the Pacific Northwest called Freem, Pfriem, and they do a Pilsner that is, I would say it's probably the best Pilsner in the country. It's my mouth's watering just thinking about it.
Yeah.
Hey, family frame, send Will some beer.
Myself, my boss, Emily Parker, our director of brewing operations, and then our head of purchasing, Jeremy Balco, we were just out in Yakima for the hop harvest last month. And we fly into Portland, and we actually drove down to Salem, visited Oregon Fruit Company, which is our main fruit supplier, one of the industry's main fruit suppliers. And then drove up along the Columbia River. And before you pass into Washington, you drive through Hood River, Oregon. And I realized that Freem was literally right off the interstate, across the street from the river. Just this beautiful, iconic spot. Yeah, I was lucky enough to have their Helles and their Pilsner several years ago, a bottle that somebody had brought back. And we were at the source. It was like it was a Wednesday afternoon, Tuesday afternoon, 2:00 in the afternoon. Place was just slamming. And of course they had, several different IPAs on, but they also had some very classic Belgian styles, very classic German styles. And first thing I had the Helles first, and then I had the Pilsner. It's probably the best Pilsner I've had in the U.S.
And he sent me pictures just to make sure that I knew that he was drinking it. Yeah. No, yeah, I would say that it's probably the best Pilsner in the country. It's incredible.
What's your favorite brewery or beer not made by Schlafly?
I mean, I'll be honest, I'm pretty loyal to Schlafly. So when I go out and I get a beer, I usually get Schlafly, and if I don't, I get Guinness, which is...
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I like it because it's light. But I would say my most recent cool brewery experience, I went down to Austin over Labor Day, and I went to this place called Jester King down there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really cool. It was just a full experience. It was all outside. It's huge. It's on a farm. Very wholesome. You have kids running around and dogs. And I got this beer. I can't remember the name of it, but I'm pretty sure it was a Weiss beer. And it had a lot of spice in it. It was but very lightly spiced. It was coriander, and I wish I could remember. It had a whale on it, and it had a whole story, and it was just really great. It was just a fun. The whole thing is just it just speaks to fun. It's just what I liked about it was I can't even remember the story, but I remember that it was a whale, and I remember it was very fantastical, and it just kind of all went. I felt like it was just a very full experience, so that was really cool.
So it wasn't just the beer, it was an experience or something.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
that.
I think that's what a lot of people are drawn to with craft beer is the full experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I do like I mean, you mentioned that there's a place back home. It's it's not very large, but they've got they have the building it used to be where they did all of the stuff, and then they built they got a little bit bigger, so they built another one to do with all the brewing equipment because they used to have a really tiny rig. Mm-hmm. But now they're proper and they're doing a little local distribution, which is it's nice to see them grow. So between the two buildings, it's kind of just an open area, and they put AstroTurf there. Yeah, and kids can run around, kick the ball, all that stuff. So people that are parents, you're I don't have to be uncool. I mean, I leave by the time the sun goes down for the most part, but it's hey, it's after work, it's early enough in the day, my son likes to play cars. He can roll his little cars around. We're sitting there, just talk, all this stuff, and have a couple beers and, maybe bring some home. And I like that environment where it's for so long you think, oh, are you bringing your kid to a bar? What kind of parent are you kind of play? That used to be the thing, but places like that are just, no, it's family friendly. Right. I was there at 4:00 and I was probably gone by 6:00 and, got to, my son got to play with some little friends there and, got to talk to my little friends here and drink a couple of these friends. And, so it's real. I honestly like where beer is going. I guess that's, so I would say for the experience, I would say that's a really big piece there.
Well, I wanted to point out that what we have going at both the Bottle Works in the dining room and here at the tap room and in our dining room, the lack of TV and what you're talking about, what I'm talking about is we're not glued to a TV. We're enjoying our beer, enjoying the people that we're with, and also entertained by little toddlers being ridiculous and dog. So, and I think that is the direction that beer is going. And I think personally, I'm a big fan. I think it's great. I think it's because I think what we're all looking for right now is connection. I think beer is a great way to connect with people.
If your beer has character, I think your brewery should have character to match it. So if you've got a boring beer, then a boring establishment would kind of fit that. But yeah, I really do enjoy the way that beer in general is going.
We welcome everybody at our locations. No exceptions.
And why wouldn't you?
Right.
Why wouldn't you? All right. Well, we're going to take a little sip here. What do we got here?
This is the Kolsch.
The Kolsch.
Kush.
So
Kush.
This beer has one of the best stories of any of the beers we make. Yeah. The Kolsch style, and in case your listeners can't see this, it is served in the traditional Stange glass that is famous to Cologne, and Dusseldorf uses it for its alt beer as well. But if you're not familiar with the glass, it's a tall, skinny, not that tall pipe that holds a little cylinder shape that holds just under 7 ounces. And the tradition in Germany, in those parts of Germany, is to serve it deliver it in a tray called a Kranz. It holds, I think, 11
I think that's
stangas, and if you can check that off your bucket list, do it. It's worth it. The tab is kept on the third coaster. 2 people out drinking. There's a third coaster, and that's where the Kobe, the beer server, tabulates the beers you're drinking. And it's not even a 7-ounce beer. It's a 33. How many mil is this?
Yeah,
0.2 mil. So 5 of these is a liter. 5 of these is 2 pints of beer. We can do that. And I think it is a fabulously traditional way to serve the Kolsch style, and helps the taste of the beer too. I am a believer in the appropriate glass for the appropriate beer. I mentioned a good storyline. Thank you for the reminder, Jared. Mrs. Schlafly, Tom Schlafly's wife Ulrika, is from Cologne. When they went back to visit her family, she introduced Tom to Andrea and Heinrich Becker, who own the Geffel Brewery. They became good friends. They sent us a keg of yeast. Fat axe, that was an invoice. And we brewed the beer with it and have hung on to the yeast ever since. And I think it is one of the reasons this beer took gold medal at the World Beer Cup a few years ago.
And I was going to ask about beer awards. And if you want to speak to them, you obviously can. But I know that in and of itself could be a very, very long conversation. So if you choose to speak to some of your accomplishments, we can absolutely do that. But I won't drag it out of you if we...
Historically, I'll say I'll let these guys take it, but historically, we didn't enter beers in competition and always felt that, not that we didn't want to spend the money or send people to the competitions or the festivals and everything, but because we strongly felt the award-winning medal was sitting in bar stools and dining room tables at the place downstairs.
So better butts in seats than ribbons on necks?
Mm-hmm. Brew for the beer, not to chase the medal. Sure, the medals are great, but if you want to spend it, I'm not knocking that. But
one thing I wanted to say is that I think the Kolsch kind of exemplifies is sort of the relationships that Schlafly beer has created. I feel like having that connection to Cologne exemplifies how Tom and Ulrika, like, they met because Tom started learning German in order to really extend his brewing business, basically. And by learning German, that's how he ended up meeting his German wife. You and Steven met his wife here, and Jared had the connection here. I think there's I've only been here since July, but I feel like I keep hearing all these adorable stories of how this place kind of brings people together. And I feel like that's more important even than our awards are important, but I think that's like kind of the long-term theme. So
what you're saying is you got a job here because you were looking for a spouse? Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm only 25, so I'm going to back down from that one.
Oh, man. So in the last, probably the last 10 years, we've entered a few beers and a few competitions. Like Steven said, we won gold at the World Beer Cup for Kolsch. Pumpkin won silver.
Silver at GABF.
GABF a few years ago.
That's robbery.
And
silver? How dare they?
Yeah, I mean, the accolades are nice. It always reminds me, there's a KG old veteran that along my path towards Schlafly I worked with for a little bit, and he always would say things like, awards don't pay the bills. He was like, there are plenty of breweries that won GABF medals that aren't open anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
It's great to win medals. It's cool in the moment, but at the end of the day, I think, like Steven said, people in the seats, pints across the bar, sales numbers, people vote with their dollars, so
there it is.
It's cool. It's fun. I always pay attention, when GABF or World Beer Cup's happening, and like this year, back to the 7,500 breweries or whatever we have. I mean, there were so many like awards going out, and I was just like, I haven't heard of any of these breweries that are gold, silver, or bronze in this category. And that's partially on me because as I've gotten older in the industry, I'm paying attention in a different way than I used to. Like when Untapped first came out, I was like, checking off beers, blah, blah, blah. And now I'm just like...
I used to use that app religiously when I lived here. I was like, yep, got to catch them all. That was my Pokemon right there.
Yeah. And then, a couple of years ago, me and Will got to travel in Germany and one day with Switzerland and Austria and Liechtenstein too. But traveling in Germany and
So it's
meeting.
like, what, a 4-hour trip total of
Yeah.
driving?
Yeah.
That's what's so cool about that area.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we took a Zeppelin ride over Lake Constance, kind of seeing all of what we had just driven around.
Field trip.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you guys let me know. I'll see if I can clear my schedule.
Yeah. But when we went there to meet with a lot of the German hop growers and suppliers that we've been working with for decades, but had never really like put boots on the ground over there. Talking with them about like American beer culture versus German beer culture and things like Untapped. I mean, that just wasn't even on their radar. They were like, why would people want to try like new things all the time?
Right.
You know, like what's wrong with Helles and Pils and
Yeah, just have
Dunkel?
Helles.
And
If it works, it works.
right?
Yeah.
So it's just interesting, you know, and the cultural side of things, you know, for them, beer and pubs and beer gardens, they are about coming together and conversation and music and, you know, life and friendships and relationships. And here in the U.S., we have that, but then there's also that aspect of what's new, what have I never had before.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's like the chase for I think a lot of people that get into beer, that is more in the early stages, and then they kind of settle down to like, these are the styles I like, these are the breweries I like, you know, because there are so many breweries now. It's overwhelming. You know, you go to a bottle shop, and I mean, if I'm buying anything that isn't ours, if it's not code dated, I'm not buying it, because I don't know, it could be a year old, it could, you know, be a week old.
Right. Yeah.
Dust off it.
You know, but it's, as a brewer, I feel a personal charge to make sure I'm always like trying new stuff.
Yeah.
And if something wins an award, we had local brewery here, Rockwell, won I think silver or bronze this year for they were in the Keller Pils category. They call it a Pilsner, but their brewer, when I talked to him about it, he was like, it didn't fit any of the classic like Czech Pils or Bohemian Pils, you know, kind of style guidelines. So I put it in the Keller Pils category. And then I tried the beer, and I was like, oh, yeah. Because, I mean, you know, like Will was saying, Keller Pils is one of my favorite styles. We put one out earlier this year, and all the brewers just drank their faces off on it.
That's all we drank when we were in
say,
Germany.
Is that still available?
No, it was one of those like
One-offs.
single batch. I think we're brewing it again.
Yeah, I think we're going to brew a small batch next year.
That was one where the brewers were like, we're making Keller Pils again. And we practiced certain German phrases, but they were just
in English.
they were just like silly, like face candy. I mean, just really dumb things like that.
And you translated that to German?
We translated that to German.
It was a great beer.
So we could, you know, because at the end, we get down to the end of the shift, you're like, hey, you want a beer? Yeah, I want a beer. What do you want? And then, you know, it's like whatever the German translation for like face candy. Or, you know.
So this wasn't like a German term. This was just like terms you use. And he's like, hey, let's just say it in German.
Yep.
Yeah. And
Got it.
using Google Translate and that kind of stuff to like, and some of them German, they were like, we don't have a word for this.
Sei vorsichtig, Kimmy spricht das Deutsch, ja?
Yeah.
Bestimmt.
Ich kann Deutsch,
That's the extent of it.
aber ich habe viel vergessen.
Yeah.
Forgot a lot of it.
Yeah. But I'm going to look that up for you.
Yeah. Yeah, there's face candy, there's something else. I'll have to ask Alec.
So,
anyways.
So as far as just the talking points, I mean, you guys have pretty much done a great job just kind of checking all my boxes here. The only other question, just more kind of a fun question, it kind of plays off of the other one, but you know, where I was talking about the other crap roulette. This one is, what's your you go to a gas station and you have to grab a beer. What's that go to?
I hate to interrupt, but it's Gesicht Süßigkeiten.
Yep. Süßigkeiten. Yep.
Day in the life of
Face
Schlafly
candy.
people.
God bless you.
Yeah, don't
So-
say that in the gas station.
What kind of? Oh man, what kind of gas station are we talking? Is this like?
This is we'll just say 7-Eleven. You walk into 7-Eleven.
Is Montucky Cold Stack
I was
available
gonna say
there?
that's a good one.
Especially in June when they change it to a
If
unicorn.
I'm in the Pacific Northwest, I'm going to grab a Ronier.
I was gonna say vitamin R.
a Vitamin R.
Let it rain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean here I'm probably grabbing 24-ounce can of Stag or High Life.
Yeah.
Stag is very interesting. Just to update your listeners.
Yeah,
all
people
over
probably
the
don't know what that
world.
is.
I kind of
I learned this recently. So historically, Stag was brewed at the Stag Brewery in Belleville. It is now brewed at
Which is in the St. Louis region.
Oh, sorry. Yes, local vernacular.
Yep.
30 minutes, half an hour east, less than half an hour east of St. Louis. And I learned recently that Stag is not available almost everywhere in this country, meaning it's pretty hyper local. Throughout Missouri, maybe parts of Kansas. I don't think it goes very far north and south.
No.
Definitely statewide in Illinois, maybe not even statewide in Illinois, but you can't get it in Indiana.
Yeah, it's like Old Style or Olympia or Dixie or Rainier. It's
Yeah.
Can I cuss?
I mean, are you physically able to?
Yeah. I was gonna, so we call it like there's everyone has like a local shit beer. And not saying that Stag is shit because I had one last night, but like it's one of those things that like there are these pockets.
The regional adjunct.
The
lagers.
regional adjunct lagers,
yeah.
and like when we go and travel places, it's like the hunt to figure out what that is and find it and drink it, and it's probably going to taste pretty close to Stag, but like it's just fun. Like when we went to New Orleans, it was like we gotta the Dixie. Oh God, we gotta drink all the Dixie.
So is that new code speak? We're gonna go find an RAL somewhere.
Well, it's funny.
Or an RSL.
So down in
RSB.
Florida, we actually have a grocery store called Winn-Dixie.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I happened to be in Winn-Dixie, and I saw Dixie beer. And like you mentioned, Louisiana, I had no idea where it was from, but I'd never seen it before. I was like, is this like their own like store brand? Because that would be kind of neat. Like if you guys had Schnucks beer, like a special Schnucks brand right here. I know you guys have done stuff for Schnucks.
We do
here,
yes.
which by the way, that's the St. Louis area grocery store.
That's the Publix Winn-Dixie of the St. Louis region.
I mean, now Publix. Hold on, that's near and dear to my heart. But.
I'm just saying, Safeway. What's the most famous grocery store in the country?
Yeah.
Grocery store, Schnucks.
I mean, there's like 70 Schnucks or something like that in the metro region. So.
Do you know though that Stag's made in Wisconsin?
Yeah.
Like I just find that so weird.
Isn't that crazy?
Why is it our regional? if
all
it's
of
made
that
there?
stuff.
Yeah.
Like Rainier, Olympia, most of it's made in Milwaukee.
Is it all just the same?
It could
recipe?
be, but
It's
that's not why you drink it, Kimmy.
It's called
that's not why you drink it.
It's called the stream, but you don't
To
think
be a
about that.
hipster, is that why you
maybe,
drink it?
but it's also just good and cheap.
Yep.
Especially that second word,
Yeah,
cheap.
cheap.
And consistent.
And consistent. Yeah, and consistent.
Do you know Montucky Cold Snack?
I don't know that. No, I'm not familiar.
The story I learned in Nashville when we were down there earlier this year is that a couple of firefighters in Montana mentioned they couldn't wait to get off their extended multi-day shift so that they could have a cold snack, another term for a cold beer or cold beverage. Mm-hmm. And Montucky might be a nickname for, I don't know, country bumpkin or something in Montana. Montucky, and correct me if I'm wrong, but
is that like a Hoosier in this area?
Oh, there's a story. Yeah,
I'm an outsider, but I have heard the term
for your
used.
listeners and most of the people in this country. Hoosier is somebody from Indiana around here. I don't know where it came from, but
I do.
Hoosier. Then you're going to tell that story. I'll just finish the Montucky. They got together and made a beer and called it Montucky Cold Snack, and it's a rearing horse on the 16-ounce can label, bright blue and white label. And during the Pride Month, they changed that to a unicorn with rainbow colors. It's pretty hilarious.
Oh, nice.
And again, it's a regional adjunct lager, I do believe. So Hoosier?
Yeah, so I grew up in Indiana,
Hoosier.
You're a Hoosier.
Yeah, I'm a Hoosier. My family has deep roots, 200 plus years in Nashville, Indiana, which is right outside of Bloomington, Indiana, home of Indiana University, the Hoosiers. And when I first met, my fiance Kelsey and started hanging out here, and I noticed people would use Hoosier in a way that you would use like white trash or redneck, kind of thing. And I was just like, and for the most part, nobody even knew why they did that. It was just like this ingrained culture and for me, misuse of language. So I looked it up, and there were striking factory workers here in St. Louis around the turn of the century, and the workers that replaced them while they were on strike came from Indiana. And all, because it'd be one thing if like Missouri and Indiana touched, or like rival states or anything, but they're not, and then
It's like 300 miles away from Indianapolis or something like that.
it's like 250.
Yeah.
I mean, to get from here to the Indiana border, it's about 130 miles, But it was just simply because all of the replacement workers came from Indiana, and so the term Hoosier became a negative, derogatory term here, and it just stuck. And people have no idea why they say this and why this like ingrained state hate, exists. But that's why.
Wow, that's
But the
wild.
state hate.
That's because they've always done it.
Yeah,
the reason we do it is because we've always done it.
I was
Because state hate doesn't exist. It's just a vernacular for a hick Hoosier redneck, and an adaptation of it. One of my favorites is Hoosier. Shows a little bit of French too, to dress it up a little bit.
I was pretty embarrassed in college when someone I met from Indiana was like calling themselves a Hoosier, and I was like, "What?" I was so confused. I was like, "Why are you calling yourself a Hoosier?
Is this like self-degrading?
Why are you self-deprecating yourself?" And we had to go down the line, and he had to explain this to me, and I had to get rid of this ingrained, weird, rude thing that was in my system.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's pretty funny.
That's awesome. All right, well, at this point, we're going to take a quick little break, let everybody do whatever they'd like to do for a moment. So for all of you listening, it'll be a matter of seconds.
Now it's time to drink a beer.
All right, we're back. So it's been probably, 20-ish minutes of real time and about 3 seconds of radio time now. So I'm back here. By the way, you can get all of these great beers, these Schlafly beer, not Schlafly. And I do have a coaster here that says Schlafly, and the pronunciation is SH, like sh. Then the word laugh, Laugh, and then Lee, Lee, Schlafly. So
Hey, Joe.
don't get it wrong.
That's the old coaster because it doesn't work. I was in a bar outside Annapolis, and a woman who was at the event where we were had multiple other beverages. I can't blame it on Schlafly. And she couldn't get the name right. And I showed her the pronunciation guide, and she's looking at it, and she said, "What is it? Schlafly?" And if you look at it briefly, you can see the word slaughter in there. If you add it, and I looked at it, I thought, "You are 100% correct." So I turned it over and I pointed to the word Schlafly, and I said, "Just pronounce every letter." But she was drunk and she couldn't do it.
Actually, keeping with the word slaughter, I did see something. I forget the entire joke, but someone called up 911 and they wanted to report a crime. And he said, "What is it?" He said, "There's this obnoxious man over here, and he just won't stop laughing. It's ridiculous." And they go, "Well, I understand it's annoying, but it's not a crime." And they said, "No, what's man's laughter?" Because if you look at the word manslaughter, it's so it's all about where you put a space in that particular one. I dig it. By the way, I'm a dad, so I get to make jokes like that. So, if there was only one reason to have a kid, it was that I can now legitimately make these jokes. So, yeah.
Twitter, oops, I dadded again. Very fun.
You guys heard that plug right there. So, by the way, we're here at Schlafly. We have 2 locations. Currently, I'm sitting at the tap room, 2100 Locust Street, in St. Louis, Missouri. 63103. That was my zip code when I lived here. And the Bottle Works out there in Maplewood. That's 7260 Southwest Avenue, Maplewood, Missouri. So now we are going to taste a beer. I feel pretty privileged here because this beer is not yet ready. But on that note, if you're listening to this, it's already out. But I still feel privileged anyway. So what we have here is the coffee stout. Who wants to talk about and then obviously drink some coffee stout?
I'll let you guys talk about the beer. I just have a quick nugget of history about it, which I can do later.
Well, I don't want to take the history nugget away from Steven. This is kind of based on a classic oatmeal stout base. Not exactly the same as our regular oatmeal stout, but very similar. We tweaked the recipe a little bit over the years to better accentuate the coffee. But we brew a classic stout, and then we make a toddy. We get We work directly with Caldi's. They source the French roast it for us. They grind it, deliver it. Right after they grind it, we throw it into a big tank that we use for making toddies or dry hopping, this, that, and the other. Let it sit for a precise amount of time, because we found over the years if you leave your contact of the toddy on the grounds for too long, you're going to over extract and you're going to end up creating a what ultimately we kind of perceive as like a pepper, like a green pepper kind of flavor.
Okay.
So years of experiment and expertise, we figured out, and also working with Caldi's, like the precise kind of window of when to get off the ground. So yeah, this is a seasonal beer for us. It's one of our most popular seasonal beers, both internally from production staff and restaurant staff. I mean, they've been pestering me downstairs. When's Coffee Stout coming out? When's Coffee Stout coming out? And we actually have a serving tank filled with it. I just haven't let anybody have any of it yet. Well, actually, I take that back. Will's birthday was a couple weeks ago.
We drank some.
Privilege.
Really quick, I just had one question. You mentioned the coffee company. Is that a local?
Yeah,
local group?
Caldi's. Yeah, they've been in business 25 years. Yeah, they're kind of, if you know, Schlafly is kind of the godfather of craft beer in St. Louis. I think Caldi's is kind of the godfather of, you know, smaller craft, roaster kind of coffee here in town. And we work with them on several different coffee beers. We've got the Stout Bout pack that's coming out, which is a variety pack. There's 4 different stouts, 3 bottles of each. We've got a latte stout that's coming out in that pack, and that features Ethiopian coffee. This is obviously a French roast, very classic kind of dark roast. So, and then we're doing Imperial Coffee Stout next year, early next year. That'll be out, and we're going to meet with them soon to kind of check out some new coffees to maybe incorporate into that beer. So,
just obviously it's not there yet, but this, because I like the Imperial Coffee Stout idea. Are we going to look for a really, really dark coffee? Really, really, what kind of characteristics do you think you're going to look for that one?
Well, it's going to be interesting. We have this festival every spring in March called Stout and Oyster, and
yes,
yeah,
lots of oysters consumed in that one.
Huge festival, 2.5 days. I mean, months of work go into this thing. Bunch of bands, live music. I don't know, 60,000 oysters flown in. Shuckers, 70,000, 80,000.
Sold.
More.
Star Shuckers.
More. We fly in Shuckers from both coasts and the center coast, the mountain coast. The no coasters. But we do a bunch of extra kind of specialty little small batch stouts for that event too. So, we've trialed different coffees from them, like one of their espressos, some other stuff. And I always joke, like, I'm a coffee nerd around like coffee professionals, how like home brewers are around me, where it's just like, just enough to ask some really kind of enlightened but stupid questions. So yeah, I always look forward to hanging out with them and seeing what they're excited about, new coffee varieties that they've experienced, out in the field. So yeah, we'll see. We might end up a darker thing if they have some really cool. I'm a big fan of African lighter kind of coffees, big fruit bouquet kind of stuff. So we'll see. Nothing's set in stone yet with that.
Cool. So with this particular coffee stout, if we could get a little bit of background, I know you said it's a seasonal. Roughly how long have we been making this one?
Since shortly after Caldi's opened. Caldi's Coffee Roasting Company was founded by Suzanne Langlois and Howard Lerner in 1994, and their original cafe is in the Des Moines area, about 4 or 5 miles from here. And then they opened shortly thereafter a larger commercial coffee roasting facility 1.5 blocks north of here on 21st Street. And the roasters, both when they opened the cafe and then when they had the roasting company down the street, would come in after work and request we had an espresso machine at the bar at the time, and they requested a shot of espresso to pour into their oatmeal stout. And, excuse my French, but voila, Coffee Stout was born. And we got together with them and actually laid out in the brew house very specific, almost like by titration, specific amounts of cold toddy coffee added to the oatmeal stout. We made pitchers up of specific amounts of coffee, stout and specific amounts of coffee, and we all honed in on this blend that eventually became 10 pounds of ground coffee that we dumped into a couple of buckets on the taproom level here. Put it in the cooler in the buckets and added that to the finished beer. Not the grounds. We pull the grounds out.
Yeah.
And as Jared mentioned, the
True
cold
grit.
toddy, it's cold toddy extraction, and that might be a redundancy. Toddification is an extraction.
Yeah.
Rather than hot brew at home in the morning, it's cold soaking, which takes a little longer. And the results speak for themselves. And this tastes delicious.
I cannot
Right
argue
now.
with that. I mean, there's no denying that this is. I mean, honestly, I'm almost not even convinced that there's beer in here. I mean, I've definitely got my coffee, and which is good because I actually went to a bachelor party last night. I purposefully didn't drink at this bachelor party, so I'd be nice and frosty for you guys this morning. So this is my little coffee this
There you
morning.
go.
I got so that's perfect. The question I just because why not? Is there going to be caffeine in this?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the
Equivalent to like a cup.
Yeah, it's equivalent to like a cup of coffee.
Per
so-
12 ounce or pint?
Per 12 ounce.
Per
I
12
think.
ounce, yes.
Yeah. So a pint will get you a bit more.
So it definitely you could say, hey, this is my cup of coffee today,
Yeah.
and you're not
I do it often.
So you're not day drinking, you're just having coffee.
Exactly.
So is this like the original Red Bull and vodka?
Oh, yeah.
So is
Yeah.
this like the original one of those as far as the marriage of
Of
caffeine
caffeine and
and
alcohol?
alcohol,
maybe. I mean,
Four Loko.
yeah.
there you go.
No, I mean, it could be. Like you said, I mean, it's just it's a great beer. It's kind of like having a cold brew. It's
very
awesome.
very enjoyable.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was going to ask, just because we've got the name Coffee Stout, tells you exactly what it is. You've got a lot of these traditionally named things. I've been to a lot of places where the naming convention is whatever springs to mind. Who decided, or how was that decided? That we just, hey, we'll just tell you what it is instead of.
I love this topic.
I think they were probably just doing it before the names were a thing, right? I mean,
Well, I guess because you like you said, you've been here since 1991, so it wasn't like, hey, let's call it Cocoa Puffs or
right?
something.
Yeah, that wasn't
crazy.
that wasn't
Yeah.
a thing back
So
then.
that probably just by the overall necessity, it just
We just fell into it. We needed signage for the beer, and Pale Ale was on tap, and ESB was on tap. Oatmeal Stout clarification. One of the first beers we served was an ESB beer style, but we called it Ebenezer's Christmas Ale. So if you walk into the tap room way back then and order an Ebenezer's Christmas Ale, you're not going to know that it's a 6% ESB. So we have named beers by other than the beer style name, but for the most part, there aren't a whole lot of other, like
Call it what it is.
White lager. What is that? Well, obviously it's a lager, and it's probably light in color, so
Yeah.
you're not too far away from it. And there are a couple of others that you have to inquire what it is, but for the most part, with Schlafly beers, you get what it says it is.
what you see is
Straight
what you
up.
get.
Yeah, that's really important to us for people
I like
just
it.
getting into beer. This is what I want, or if they're looking for something, and we tell you what it is. We don't want to trick you. So
And I do notice, you guys went 5.7% alcohol in that. Were you? I mean, obviously that's where we're at, so it's just that's where it belongs. But when you look at a coffee stout like this, what would a thought be of a either slightly higher, slightly lower, or a lot higher, or a lot lower? I mean, I know you did say about the imperial, so
It wasn't an option. That's what the oatmeal stout was. We added coffee to it. So a
Yeah.
whole lot of things are as basic as that, really.
yeah, wow. I mean that makes perfect sense because it's based on a pre-existing recipe. That's why it's there.
Sure,
Nice.
and that's why these guys can make an imperial stout now, because we want to make imperial coffee stout. Guess what? It's bigger, a lot bigger. So
It's bigger, and it has, last year we did like triple the amount of coffee that we put into this beer, into that beer too. So it's
imperial and multiple.
So this is like some espresso kind of like punch right there.
jolt.
yeah.
Ooh, Joe Cola. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. So I know that this one's going to be available real soon. By the time this is heard by everybody, this is going to be there. Just because I want to milk something out from you, just a secret thing that probably won't be out when we air this Imperial. Roughly, as a guess, when would this be available?
I think it's gonna drop mid to late March next year. Is the release for that? So we have bourbon barrel aged Imperial Stout that comes out kind of early January, and we've been making that for a long time. And then Imperial Coffee Stout is kind of the next one that comes out a couple of months after that. It's just one of those. We've kind of tweaked it a bit over the years. We've adjusted the base beer on the Imperial Coffee, so it's a bit of a sweeter and less roasty kind of base. So it really kind of sets the table even better for the coffee to really shine on top of that base too.
All right, guys. Well, it has been a pleasure speaking to all of you today. Learned a lot about some Schlafly history. We've got some good voices. If you don't have faces to the names, but you've got some good voices to the company. Nice long history here. It's definitely been an honor meeting up with you guys this morning. Hopefully we can do something like this in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, St. Louis has such a long brewing history, and Schlafly was there at the beginning of the craft movement. So, and we're not going anywhere. So,
That's right.
Thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Thanks, Joe. This was a great prelude to our show that's about to begin now. So is everyone ready for the full show? Thank you very much. This was a real treat, Joe.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, like I said, it was awesome speaking to you, and I look forward to speaking to you again in the future, possibly. And like I always say, if it wasn't for beer, you wouldn't be here.